The Buntarelli Show.
All right, continuing our three-part revisit of the Star Wars prequels, we're going to dip into Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. First thing I want to do is welcome again Khiim to the show. Khiim, thanks for hanging out.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
We're kind of just taking the whole conversation over. We started with Phantom Menace, and now we're kind of going into Episode 2. We're just going to take this conversation through all three movies. So, Khiim, let's kind of start with Anakin. Pretty much really the heart and soul of this whole thing. And what were your thoughts of him, especially in this time? A lot of the flack of like his behavior and kind of like Hayden Christensen's acting. What was your overall, looking at this again, do you have any new thoughts about Anakin?
Yeah, I know a lot of the times with Hayden Christensen, a lot of people say he has a very wooden portrayal of Vader or Anakin in the prequels, but I don't know, like just looking at it and just thinking of where he is mentally and age-wise, like he's an adolescent, you know, it kind of reflects like his behavior throughout the movie. Like I think it was portrayed accurately. Yeah,
I think at the time people were taken aback because like this is kind of like their first look at an older Anakin since, you know, him being a child. And like, but it's really how he acts in 3 that kind of saves it. It's like, okay, he shook off the kid stuff and he's more mature and he's really a kid. My thought was, you know, if you look at Vader and the way Vader talks and moves, Vader is really a wooden character. I mean, if you had somebody reading Vader's lines, and people do it all the time, do their Vader impression. I mean, it's a wooden, stiff delivery. So that part I get. But as far as like his adolescence and stuff, you and me were talking about it was kind of like the situation that he was kind of put in by the Jedi and kind of, you know, it kind of opens up where this fluke started, I believe.
He was kind of between a rock and a hard place with just this whole, him supposed to be the one and the Jedi Council, you know, I honestly felt like they never really accepted him or embraced him. They kind of feared him in a way. You know, they never really wanted to let him really just like establish all his abilities. Like I've seen it time and time, like throughout the movies, they're just kind of like shunning him and like shutting him down and just downplaying his abilities.
And not only that, but they were kind of, what's the word to it? They just kind of, they missed a lot of warning signs, it seemed like. Like, you know, the way he was kind of acting up with Obi-Wan and stuff, you know, Obi-Wan's talking and he's interrupting him. And there's like just a adolescent lack of discipline. That's one thing. But even like when he's, you know, later, when he's zipped towards like the second half of the movie, when he's killing the Sand People and Yoda's like, you know, something terrible has happened to Skywalker. And it's never really addressed. And it's like, you know, maybe they were just, you know, because of everything else happening, like the war and all these big, you know, and also like the Shroud of the Dark Side. And when you really watch it, really, they actually talk about it more. But it's like what was going on with Anakin was just kind of slipping under everybody's fingers.
Well, I honestly think that had a lot to do with what you exactly said, the Shroud of the Dark Side. Throughout this movie, you hear them, specifically Yoda and Mace Windu, say multiple times that the dark side is clouding, the dark side is shrouding, you know, like, I know personally that it's canon that dark side users have an ability called Force Cloak, to where they can initially cloak their abilities, cloak their presence, even as far as to cloak their appearance. Because you know, once we get to Revenge of the Sith, you know, you'll see Anakin physically start changing once he's giving in to the dark side. But dark side users, their body deteriorates. The more they immerse themselves into the dark side, their body literally deteriorates and is eaten away. So Force Cloak is another way to help, you know, keep up appearance. So I just feel like, you know, they couldn't see it. They couldn't see it.
That's something interesting because it makes you wonder. I'd always bought in my head when the prequels first started until episode 3 where he actually burns his face off. I was always accepted in my head that he was just being ravaged from his use of the dark side. And they could have went to him looking the exact same in Revenge of the Sith, and we could have all filled in the gaps through our imagination. The whole, like, I'm burning my face off to try to look more like the Emperor, I didn't think it was necessary. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, but also it brings a good point because Yoda is standing next to this guy the whole time. And there's some time. Yeah, and there's some times where he'll say something and Yoda will give him a sideways look or raise an eyebrow, but that's it. More like, what's your deal, bro? Like, not really like he's sensing something. It's more of like his intuition than so much just the Force. So that's interesting that you bring that up because, he is really just slipping by all these people. I mean, he is straight up next to Yoda. He's in a room with Yoda.
He's in the room with all the Jedi Council all the time. Every scene we see him, he's in a room with numerous Jedi, and they can't sense it because of the Force cloak, dark side Force cloak. You know? Yeah,
I just even when Anakin, because even when Anakin was caught off guard when he finds out he's the Sith later. So that's interesting. You brought that up because that kind of actually explains a lot that shroud of the dark side, which they did say. But it kind of like even like the smaller stuff like that, it makes a lot more sense. And it also understands how the Anakin thing slipped through their fingers. And there was a thought I had because one of the purpose of these revisits is to kind of how they reflect in movies now. And one of the polarizing points of The Last Jedi was, the way Luke went to go kill Kylo because he sensed there was some things going on with him. And one could say, well, that was a little weakness on Luke's part. But when you think of how kind of Luke's had this time to think of everything that went down, it was like, well, what was the flaw with Anakin was everybody ignored the signs. So it actually makes a little more sense from where the road Luke's been on, because he's had this time to himself to think. And he was like, I could see him thinking in his head like, no, we're not doing this again. So I kind of get it. If any problem I have with that is the fact that he ran off, because then it's like, well, you just made this mess and didn't clean it up. If you do blame yourself, you can't just leave this Sith Lord hanging around, or he wasn't exactly a Sith, but that's my only flaw. But what I'm saying is I do understand now the part where Luke goes to attack Kylo, thinking back, what Luke knows now, because Luke says, he says Sidious and stuff. Obviously in the time between Jedi and The Last Jedi, Luke's been doing his research and put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Even at one point, Yoda, I think he's talking to Mace Windu, and he just, or he's talking to Obi-Wan and Mace Windu, and he's just they're talking about Anakin and how, they've just assigned Anakin the assignment of, watching over Padme on Naboo.
Yes.
And Obi-Wan's bringing up his concern, again, doubting him. I don't know if he's ready for this, blah, blah, blah. And Yoda says, well, that's one thing that Jedi, unfortunately, nowadays are known for, is their arrogance or their all-knowing nature. So I feel like maybe at the same time, it wasn't necessarily that they let him slip through their fingers. They just were overly confident and thought they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, like, it's fine. Everything's going fine. We know what we're doing.
Exactly, And it's just like, at the same time, it's just like Palpatine, him being so close to everything and seeing how the Jedi are treating Anakin, he played off of it perfect. Like I had told you before, Anakin never really felt acceptance. Never. I would say the only person that showed him acceptance for truly who he was his mother and Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yeah.
But, beginning as a child on Tatooine, none of the other kids liked him. They made fun of him, didn't have faith that he was going to be a good pod racer. Then he comes and joins the Jedi Council. They don't even want him to join in the first place. Qui-Gon has to initially sacrifice himself so that way Anakin can be brought into the council.
Yeah, it gets the ball rolling.
So it's just like he just keeps looking for acceptance and, reassurance, and no one's giving him that. And then Palpatine comes along and is whispering in his ear, playing the devil's advocate. Well, I think you'll be the greatest Jedi of them all. You're going to override Yoda. All this stuff, just basically feeding him what he wants.
Yeah.
He just wants to feel like he belongs.
And then it comes out later with Anakin with the tantrums he throws. And it could be, what it really could be is the seeds that Palpatine's putting in his head. And that happens.
Exactly.
That happens in real life. Somebody says something to you and you're like, nah, that's silly. And then all of a sudden, like, is that it? Is that what's going?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you plant the seed in somebody's head and they start pulling it apart, thinking about it. Like, wait a minute, is he? You know, he didn't ever actually said it, but he kind of, you know, Palpatine hinted at it, but you never know if in an off-screen conversation we actually said something about. Well, no, he did say it. He goes like, you know, I'm surprised the Jedi didn't send you on this or do that. And, you know, he's saying, it's Obi-Wan, he's holding me back. And at first that line kind of caught me off guard because I'm like, where are you going from this, from your mother dying? But looking at it again and you actually watching it again, you're like, okay, he's just angry and he's got all this stuff just spewing out of him. That's where that comes from.
But I can understand his frustration because in one of the earlier scenes in the movie, he's having a dream. He's having a nightmare about his mother, and he wakes up and he tells Obi-Wan about it. And at this point, I'm not sure if they understand that Anakin has highly advanced premonitions. He can see the future. He was seeing his mother being tortured and just thought it as a dream. Obi-Wan, again, writing him off, tells him, don't pay any mind to it.
Yeah.
His mother may have been saved if Obi-Wan had been mindful of his Padawan when he brought that up to him. You know?
Yeah, and really, if he'd listened and they realized he did have that ability, they could have jumped all over that the other situation with Padme. But the problem was, you know, the only person who would listen to Anakin was Palpatine. So that's very interesting when you think about it. It's like he already knows. He goes, well, if I say something to Obi-Wan about me seeing Padme dying, besides the fact that he was kind of married to her in secret, but it's like he's not going to listen anyway. So who does listen to me? Palpatine. So yeah, it was more like Palpatine kind of jumped on an opportunity that kind of,
exactly.
You know, because these events, you know, the Clone Wars and everything else, that was set into motion before the Anakin stuff. Like these Clone Wars were going to happen.
Phantom Menace, essentially, or around the time of Phantom Menace, because I think 10 years have passed since Phantom Menace into this movie, and that's when they said Sifo Dyas had went to the Camino aliens and set up the clone army. So,
and also Palpatine's becoming the Chancellor. I mean, he already set that up in Phantom Menace, where he's already playing Darth Sidious he basically set up the situation that made him Chancellor. And it was a smaller version of what he was going to do in the future. He was playing both sides.
Exactly.
And, but the Anakin thing kind of just fell into his lap. And it was just like, you know, it was like the thing with Anakin in the beginning. It's, we'll watch your career with great interest. Another thing about the dark side, which why I think they kind of missed it, was because they refer to something that happened a long time ago. And even, and you're more of an EU, you kind of probably know the expanded stuff more than I do, but I know they had like referred to like once more the Sith will rule the galaxy, and Mace Windu had said a line like, you know, the Sith will never return. So to my understanding is, I believe the Sith as a large part were gone for a long time, which is probably why the Jedi got so comfy, because you never hear anybody really mention the dark side until Vader pops up. Now, in Luke's time, they talk about the dark side all the time because it's still pretty fresh. It's a fresh open wound. That's why Yoda and Obi-Wan are constantly throwing that dark side stuff, and I'm like, be careful. But in this movie, they don't mention it because I think it's just old news. And once again, part of their arrogance.
Yeah, you're correct, because in the first installment, the Phantom Menace, that was a conversation that they had. They Yoda and Mace Windu essentially were like, the dark side has resurfaced, and this is when Obi-Wan came. I killed Darth Maul, and then that's when they questioned, okay, well, we know the Sith rule of two. Did we kill the master or the apprentice? So you're right, they got comfy.
We'll be right back.
I want to tell you about Shopkick real quick. Shopkick is a free app that gives you points or kicks for basically doing your normal shopping. You can either just scavenger hunt for items and get kicks. You can submit receipts for kicks. And if you ain't got time for all that, you get kicks for just walking into the store. And here's the best part. You can submit these points for gift cards, and gift cards you could use. I'm talking Target, Walmart, and even Amazon. And if you sign up now using my link, you'll get 250 kicks to start. Just go to bunzerelli.com and look for the Shopkick logo, or look for the link in this episode description. One of the things that I did like seeing was Yoda's more of a leadership role, because, you know, you've seen this from the opposite end. That's why this is interesting, because you started with the prequels, whereas I started with the original trilogy. But Yoda in that leadership role and just, Mace Windu, being his right hand, or whether they were equals or whatever it was. But that little dynamic was really cool to see, because you never saw in the original trilogy, he was always Yoda by himself. But his role in this movie was really cool.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that this particular viewing of Yoda may have been like the best one that we've seen to date. I know a lot of people complain about the CGI Yoda versus the practical prop Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
To me, to each their own. But, just what we got to see from Yoda in this movie, it was amazing. Like, the fight with him and Dooku towards the end of the movie, I remember seeing this movie in theaters, and never once since that day have I gone to a movie theater and heard the response that I got when Yoda pulled out his lightsaber and started fighting.
People lost their minds.
Exactly. Everyone lost their minds for the whole extent of the fight scene. People were cheering and just going on and on. And me as a kid, I'm just like, holy crap, like I'm really a part of something right now. Like, something is going on.
Yeah. Well, from people from the older generation that knew Yoda, to us it was like, oh my God, they're doing it. And
exactly.
There's some interesting stuff behind that CGI, because in the Phantom Menace originally was a puppet Yoda, and it was really bad made puppet, and it's something to do with the casting, or I don't know what it is. For some reason, even like Last Jedi, it's like they can't seem to remake that puppet correctly, which I don't understand. Because I've seen Yodas sitting in like glass in like a shopping mall, like at a Hallmark, that look great. So why can't you get this puppet straight? But I think what had happened was, I remember hearing something like, okay, the news back then was like Yoda's going to wield the lightsaber. And we've been talking to Frank Oz about how to do it. Now, Frank Oz is the puppeteer who does Yoda. He also does Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear. He's really Jim Henson's right-hand man. And the only reason Jim Henson didn't do Yoda was because Jim Henson was doing the Muppet movie at that time, the original one. So he was actually directing it and producing it and everything, whereas Frank Oz was just another actor. He could step off and do this Yoda thing. Anyway, they were talking to him like, how can we do this? And some part in the conversation must just said, like, it's got to be CGI. Because that Muppet running around, like, picture, like, picture Kermit the Frog chasing somebody around a broomstick. You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't, the CGI was necessary. But the good thing that came out of it was the CGI model looks more like the puppet from the original trilogy. It looked better. He looked more aged. Like, for some reason, they tried to make him look so young in The Phantom Menace, which makes no sense. Because how are you so much younger between, like, 850 and 900 years old? Why is this such a drastic change? But the CGI worked, and you had that fight, and they actually went back and slapped that CGI over the puppet that was in The Phantom Menace. So now it's that consistent CGI through the prequels. But it was really, the lightsaber scene was not going to work without it. And I think the performance was pretty consistent with Yoda. A lot of the silliness and goofiness, in Empire Strikes Back, I think was really just was the ploy to fool Luke and stuff. It wasn't really like, that. But I think the CGI was necessary. It was the only way we were going to get the lightsaber fight. And whatever people think about it, at that time it was awesome. And it's like, it still is. I'll never want to take that away. Like, it was just great.
Yeah, I believe so as well. Like, I've even noticed just the quality of the CGI from the Phantom Menace to the Clone Wars, it multiplied by like 50.
Yes.
Like, it's not as standoutish as it was in the Phantom Menace. They have a lot better balance of CGI and some practical props and sets and all that stuff.
Yes.
Whereas literally in the Phantom Menace, like, every backdrop was a CGI. Just about every character was CGI,
Yeah, I feel like Naboo was, and I don't have the information in front of me, but I think Naboo was a real place. I think it was like Rome or some place that was, or at least parts of it. I don't believe Naboo was a completely CGI set.
No, I don't believe so either. I think I remember seeing something like that in the after credit scene, or not after credit scenes, but behind the scenes outtake and all that. I think it was an actual location.
They need to revisit some of these places. I think it would just be neat. Like when they brought Mustafar into Rogue One, it was cool. It's like, look, the prequels happened. They're there. And I really liked them. And what we got from them was we got the Clone Wars, and that's what's being born right here is the Clone Wars. And that whole concept. Now, it was a little bit of a clunky road, and I think a lot of that was really is George Lucas wrote this whole trilogy by himself. And I don't understand why he did it. I don't understand. Because it's possible to have a good concept and not be able to fill in the gaps. I don't understand why you wouldn't, like, okay, let me go back. Like Clone Wars. He took Dave Filoni under his wing back when, it was still Lucasfilm doing Clone Wars before the Disney takeover. I mean, Filoni worked hand in hand with Lucas. And sometimes Lucas would just kind of step back and let Filoni go. And then sometimes Filoni was doing like the Mortis trilogy, which was really heavy into the Force. And he's like, I got to get George on this one. I need to hear what, I'm getting too deep into the Force. I can't do this without George. And things like that. And what I don't say is, okay, it's two opposite ends of the spectrum. And I wanted to touch this later, but it's like, okay, like Empire was written by Lawrence Kasdan, who also wrote Force Awakens, Jedi, had some other writing credits with Lucas. And then he worked on The Force Awakens with JJ. And then you get another guy that goes off by himself. Rian Johnson does The Last Jedi. Which is still, I don't know. I still don't know my exact. I feel like that movie needs to be put on trial. Like, that'd be a great podcast to do. Find a guy that loved it and a guy who hated it and have them, like, plead their case. Because I could go either way. I feel like I could plead a case for everything on that movie, which is fun. It's fun to break it down and think about it. But anyway, it's like the new movies that are coming out, okay? Now, suppose Lucas was there. And Lucas, here's the good thing about the prequels. The prequels, Lucas had an overarching plan. Okay? Yeah. He's like, I'm going to get from point A to point C. So I have established a Jedi, established the Clone Wars, Anakin's fall, Rise of the Empire. Like, that's where I'm going. And then you start filling in the gaps and you start making these stories. And I think a lot of the flaws that could have been better were if somebody was helping him. If somebody helped him with some of the dialogue and just kind of the scene transitions and the romance, that kind of stuff, I think he needed a hand with. Whereas now you got these new movies where these directors are getting really bold and intricate, but there's nobody looking at it with a plan.
Well, you mentioned the romance, and I'm assuming you're talking about Anakin and Padme?
Yes.
Now, me watching this movie again, I kind of picked up some things, and I'm gonna throw a fan theory out there.
Okay.
If you hang on with me.
Yes.
All right. Now, if anybody's listening, if you go back and watch these scenes, every time up until the point of the final confession where Anakin just regrets everything that he's done up until that point, and they initially fall in love. Every scene, Padme is extremely uncomfortable with him. He moves closer to her. She moves away from him. I'm thinking that I think that Palpatine knew Anakin's obsession with Padme, and just another part of bringing him into the dark side, he knew that sending Anakin over there, Anakin would force himself with mind tricks onto Padme. I think that Anakin forced Padme to love him because, like I said, she never shows interest. I know the first time, like in this movie when they're alone, after I think it was either before the bounty hunter tried to attack her with those slugs or worms or whatever. It was either before that or after that. But he's looking at her in an intense way, and she says, "Please don't look at me like that." And he says, "Why?" And she's like, "Because it makes me uncomfortable." And I'm wondering, was she feeling him trying to like mind trick her? Because I know later on in Naboo, when she asked him, "Are you trying to play mind tricks with me?" He says, "No, mind tricks don't work on the weak-minded." But I'm kind of thinking that maybe he had been trying to, like, almost like a Stockholm kind of syndrome while they're in this Naboo retreat. He's just, like, forcing his way onto her,
Yeah,
like, breaking her down mentally. He just keeps trying over and over and over.
Yeah.
And then even when his confession comes, he says that he's in agony. He's haunted by the kiss that she should have never given him. And I feel that he feels guilty because he tricked her. He forced his way. He forced her to kiss him.
Here's my all right, it's very interesting. It's very compelling. Now, I've had the advantage that you've thrown this at me. So I went back and looked at it. because I'm looking for it. It's very compelling and it's very interesting because
it's there.
It's there. Here's my problem with it. I have, and I'm not saying it's not there. The only part that bothers me is it just seems. It seems like, first, it seems a little dark for Lucas, but what it also does is, as far as the storyline goes, but I guess I'm answering my own question, because if that's true, then was there ever any good in Anakin? That's the problem. You know what I'm saying? Because where's the redemption if he's doing something like that?
It might be a little dark for Lucas, but at the same time, you just have to think about what's going on in Anakin's life around this time period of Naboo's retreat. He's being tortured every night. You know, Padme says, I heard you screaming in your sleep. I heard you having a nightmare. Jedis don't have nightmares. You know, he's trying to write it off.
Yeah.
Like, he's really going through it while they're at this retreat. Not only just from Padme, but from his mom. You know, these visions that he's having from his mom. Then he goes and he kills the Sand People and comes back. And then that's when they have this big, like, all-out emotion fest.
Yeah.
And again, he's trying to convince her, like, yes, we can do this. We can be together. And her exact words is, I will not give in to this, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, again, he's trying to force her, you know? He's got a lot of, and it makes sense with the 3-story arc because, yeah, it's the Clone Wars and everything, but essentially this is just the story of Anakin Skywalker becoming Vader. So he would initially be completely good in the beginning. Towards the middle of the arc, we would see his fall, him beginning to fall or beginning to turn to the dark side, which is what we see. And then the third story, or the third act, would be his complete come to the dark side. So to me, it's not that far reached.
No, and I guess it does go back to the dark side and the possession and the control stuff, which is what a lot of what his fall is about. Yeah, I just hate to believe. I like to think like, well, maybe it helped his weak game he was throwing, like kind of steer his ship a little bit better. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I just want to more or less think like he doesn't have Padme completely mind controlled in the whole. Do you know what I'm saying? Like maybe the actual the courting helped him,
but like you said, he planted seeds.
Yeah, kind of like Palpatine did to him. I could see that. Yeah, just especially because of the Clone Wars, they're separated a lot. So I have to believe that she legitimately loves him. It's just how she fell in love that now I could be on board. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, exactly. the actual, because that is the courting. Because if you think of an example, I was going to say where Castan was involved was Empire Strikes Back, and that the way it was the same kind of time span, though, that adventure between Han Solo and Princess Leia, and at the end they're in love. You know, he's courting her the whole movie, basically. So it is kind of the same thing. I'm saying that short time span, but I think the actual courting, I could see him definitely using some help, especially with all the emotional stuff he's going on. And he did just slaughter a bunch of sand people. So I guess like mind tricking his girlfriend isn't like the worst thing he did that day.
And, you know? And to be honest, it may very well have been something that he did not even know himself he was doing.
Yeah.
You know, it might have not been him intentionally saying like, oh, I'm going to make her fall in love with me. Just like he's having these nightmares and he doesn't necessarily know. He is seeing the future. He's seeing present time. His mother is being tortured. He doesn't know that. He thinks they're nightmares.
Yeah.
You know? So it may be something that he's not in full control of yet. Because, again, the Jedi fear what he is capable of, and they're not helping him becoming who he is.
And he doesn't understand what he's capable either. I mean, he doesn't understand himself. He doesn't understand what he's going on, and there's nobody there to help him. See,
exactly.
Yeah, I could see the way I bought the romance, and I really kind of tried to break it down, but I think both things kind of work together too, because I think the part where she genuinely feels for him and felt for him, and I'm not saying he couldn't have played upon that, was because she knew him as a boy, okay, even if it was for a short time, but it's like. It's like you got to compare it to like if you have a nephew or something or some, you know, you've seen somebody as a kid.
And she does. When they first meet back up, she friend zones the heck out of him.
Yeah, but she's
like, Annie, you'll always be that little boy on Tatooine.
Yeah,
friend zone.
Yeah, But she definitely does care about him. And what's happening is she's watching like the stuff we're talking about, you know, the position he's put in and the things that happen with his mom and the things with the Jedi. She's watching all this happen. So there's definitely that caring. Like, she's watching him unravel. And as unattractive as it would be, you kind of see, like, this guy's getting a raw deal from a lot of ends. And then you start kind of feeling for him. You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying it could be a little bit of both. You know, because there's like, you know, he just says like, I killed them all. They're animals. And she kind of turns her head and walks away, but she's like concerned, even though it's like some hard stuff he's throwing at her. It's like, God, geez, really? Like, you know, half of you's like, well, I don't blame you. I mean, I'd be pissed too, but it's like, you know, like, wow, you went pretty heavy, huh? You know, obviously taking a little back, but just, and you know, it's like, what's that syndrome with nurses and the soldiers kind of thing? It's, Florence Nightingale syndrome, I think it is. It's like he's emotionally injured the whole time in front of her. And I think that's where she kind of latches on to that.
Yeah, just starts need to take care of that.
Yeah, and maybe because of like at the end where they think they're facing their debts, they kind of just, you know, seal the deal there before it develops.
Yeah, she's just like, well, we're going to die, so we might as well.
Let's go to Geonosis, because that's where everything kind of ends for the movie, but begins as far as the Star Wars universe. Yeah. And, you know, they're showing the, what are those aliens called? I'm sorry, Genosians. Should have been the easiest thing to remember. But, you know, they're obviously like the, you know, the mechanically inclined. You know, they showed them building droids, kind of establish who they are. Right off the bat, I'll tell you something that irked me about the whole Genosian thing. And this actually really did, you know, like I said, nitpicking. Like, I think we talked before in the Phantom Menace one. Like, you know, I don't think Jar Jar got a fair deal. But on the contrast to that, and I don't know how you thought about it because you watched it from, like I said, another end. You're just meeting C-3PO. But from my end, I know C-3PO from the original trilogy. Yeah. So my problem with this is now C-3PO is doing this goofy slapstick comedy, and it's just not him to me. It was kind of insulting to the character. If you're going to make a new character and have him act like that, that's one thing. But that wasn't the 3PO I knew. I mean, you know, 3PO was neurotic and stuff. And when you put him in like I felt like if there was a banana peel there, 3PO would have slipped on it. It was so slapstick. And he's doing these corny one-liners. And it doesn't irk me so much like it makes me hate the movie or this or that. It's like, really, was that... I'd rather, like, you should have just put Jar Jar back in there if you're going to do that. Like, why'd you put Jar Jar in the background if you needed somebody to act like a buffoon? Bring Jar Jar back. I didn't like you doing that with an established character. Didn't kill anything for me. But even watching it again, like, I watched Jar Jar and I'm like, there he goes. He's being Jar Jar. But the 3PO part, I really watch it. And I'm like annoyed watching it. I'm legitimately like, I actually had to fast forward through it a little bit. It's like, I can't do this again. It's like really annoying the shit out of me. But I just wanted to get that off my chest. I don't know what your thoughts were but on that. But, you know, obviously you got to know 3PO later. But I don't know. It was a little cheap for him. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like Johnny Carson coming out and farting with his armpit. You know what I mean? It's like, that's beneath you, bro. You know what I mean? Let somebody else do that. You're better than that. Exactly. You're better than this 3PO. You know what I'm saying? Your comedy's a little more refined than what's happening right now. I mean, it was cute in the beginning, but it got old real fast to me. But
yeah, I think that may have been an attempt to get the younger crowd to like these characters, you know? I think that's all that really was. It wasn't meant for the older audience. Because
I'm sure there were kids cracking up in a movie theater. Like, there was like 5-year-olds or something, you know what I mean? Or like, you know.
Yeah.
But it was just like, I don't know. Like, I liked Star Wars, and the older I got and the more I understood it, I understood more about it and more about it. But, you know, some of the funniest things, I thought the droids were funny enough, kind of, or at least interesting enough to look at. But as far as when you move on to the actual heart, I don't know what it is about Count Dooku. he's really the central part of this whole thing. And now the funny thing is I just remember, because for me, Attack of the Clones was so long ago, so I'm more familiar with Dave Filoni's Count Dooku because I got so used to him, watching the Clone Wars for, I think it was like a 10-year span that show went. But, not 10 years, but I'm saying it was like 5 seasons but anyway, I don't know if it's because Christopher Lee's supposed to be like this seasoned actor. I don't know if it was the dialogue put in front of him, but he just seemed really stiff or something. I know it's a little minuscule part, but like when he's coming in, he goes, like he was just a bad liar. Like when he walked in on Obi-Wan, he goes, no, this is a mistake. I was like, really? That's what you got?
Now, I think the thing is, I think a lot of the problems with these prequels is that Lucas was tapping into the expanded universe outside of what common Star Wars people already knew. Mm-hmm. So Dooku himself falls aligned. He's more aligned with gray Jedis than he is dark side or light side. Mm-hmm. He's kind of a more a self-centered Jedi, and that's why he reveals Sidious' plan to Obi-Wan, and it's like, Obi-Wan, join me, because essentially Dooku wants to be the number one. He wants to take Sidious out. And if the Jedi will help him do that, or if Obi-Wan will help him do that, then he will do that. If not, then he's going to stay with Sidious and rise the power that way. There's just a lot more going on with Dooku, and that's why he stops for that brief moment, and he's just like, I really wish Qui-Gon was here. I could really use his help. Because, again, Qui-Gon was a gray Jedi. He played both sides some of the time. Qui-Gon would be able to relate to him with what's going on with the knowledge that he knew of Sifo Dyas and Sidious and Palpatine and all this, He knew everything that was going on, and he was just kind of in the middle of it and just looking, how can I come out on top of all of this that's going on?
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, he's a much more complex character, and I think that's where a lot of these holes fall through, is George Lucas just kind of, he wrote this story, but he gave himself room to write more afterwards, or for people to come and fill in things afterwards to continue to expand it, so it's not something that's closed off.
And really, Filoni did. Filoni went in there and kind of filled in a lot of those gaps, especially if you watch some of the lost seasons and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen that, but they actually have a part where Yoda's having this dream, and it's actually Dooku's hanging out with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in like the courtyard, and they're just talking. And he's like, something's not right about this.
Dooku was Yoda's Padawan.
From what you're saying is Dooku knew it's going down right now. Dooku's like, well, here's my opening. Here's my chance. If I'm going to go with plan B, I need some help. But
yeah, exactly. Obi-Wan, will you help me? Obi-Wan's like, no. And then he's like, well, your release is going to be hard to obtain then. And he just walks away.
It's like, well, back to plan A, because I definitely can't do this without help. Because the Clone Wars are coming. I know what's coming. And that is really, really interesting.
And they play more on him being a gray in the Clone Wars in the animated series. You see a lot more of him being more hesitant to attack. Even in this movie, Attack of the Clones, once he cuts off Obi-Wan's arm, or cuts Obi-Wan in the leg and cuts off Anakin's arm and force pushes him back, he stops for a moment and thinks like, wow, I really didn't want to do that. I didn't really want to have to hurt them. He stops, and you see the remorse on his face of what he's done. And then that's when Yoda walks in, and he's like, okay, well, let's do this then.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that's going on with Dooku than we are seeing at surface value in this movie.
Yeah, and it's just he just in the animated series, because they kind of open up on him more. He's just such a badass in the animated series. Like I said again, it's interesting, like pulling these things apart and looking at them with a fresh pair of eyes, looking back and really studying these things. So. And of course, the big thing about this movie is the start of the Clone Wars, which was an event, first uttered by Luke Skywalker. He goes, "You fought with my father in the Clone Wars," and it was just a passing line. And who would know? And then George Lucas was like, "Well, I got to name whatever I'm doing. I better name it the Clone Wars because that's what this is going to be."
Yeah.
And it was freaking. I don't even know if Lucas knew at that time what the Clone Wars were going to be. And it just this was the birth of it, and it was the kickoff of all the events. It's really, I used to look back and think it was my least, say it was like kind of the weakest one, but I think this movie, looking at it again, it had its flaws, but it was really important part of the whole thing because it really sets the stage for what happens in the third movie and the future whole galaxy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's the most impactful piece of Star Wars lore. it branches out for everything that we have today.
I tell you, Khiim, it's been a great conversation. I'm really enjoying doing this, and I'm looking forward to bringing it to the next show when we hit episode 3. So, Khiim, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a blast as always, buddy.
Hey, thank you, man. I appreciate it.